On this episode of the Big Blue Huddle, I'll be interviewing Patricia Traina, one of the premier sports writers covering the New York Football Giants. Pat writes for Inside Football, and you can find her at Football Mavens, and her podcasts are available at LockedOnGiants.com. I'm your host, Ed Buetti, and this is the Big Blue Huddle podcast. Hi, Pat.
Hey, how are you?
I'm good. I'm well, thank you. Thank you for being on the show. I much appreciate it. I know how busy you are right now.
Not a problem. Always happy to get on with you guys.
Thank you. So you're very excited about the first game tomorrow against the Jets?
Yeah, I mean, it's been a while since we've had any semblance of real football, especially for the Giants. So I'm very interested to see how all these practices that they have put into place, all these new plays and wrinkles and stuff, how they all kind of, shape up and how they look.
I've been attending most training camp sessions now for a really long time. And although there's a lot to take away when you go to these things, I found that some of those takeaways, and I include the preseason games too, don't necessarily translate into the reality of the regular season. How do you separate the practice portion and the repetition to form a reasonable expectation of what this team can be and what they will become?
Well, I think you've got to remember that, what you see in the open practices, I mean, I don't think the Giants are going to show you everything, because remember, they also do a closed walkthrough. So you're not going to see everything, but what they're looking for is they're looking to evaluate guys who can execute basic concepts of what they ultimately want to do. So, for example, let's say on defense, they want somebody to do, they're rolling out a three safety package, the big nickel. They might do something similar to that to kind of simulate what that big nickel is going to look like ultimately, without so much giving it away. And what they're doing is just kind of, evaluating the players, whether or not they can play at the speed they need them to, whether or not their assignments sound, and, how they respond to adversity that comes up when you're out there on the field.
How do you evaluate them when you're on the sidelines there? And, sometimes you have a good view and sometimes you don't. But what do you look for? Are you looking at scheme? I guess you're looking at a lot of different things. Tell me what you look for.
What I've been trying to do is I've been trying each practice to hone in on a specific unit or a specific, segment of practice. So, for example, if they run the blitz package, I might hone in on, okay, how's Daniel Jones responding to the blitz? How's Kyle Lauletta responding to the blitz? So instead of trying to take it all in, because you're right, you can't possibly see everything, and I just kind of zeroed in on certain things that I want to see, things that I think were a problem for this team last year. And I've gone, and based my Inside Football report around those things rather than, report on every single player. We're going to do that, obviously when the games start. But, just for our training camp report, what we did was, what I just described to you, where I honed in on where there were problems last year and how has that improved.
Well, that's really a good way of going about it. So my question off of that would be, if you're evaluating a Daniel Jones and he's with the second string offensive line and they don't seem to be as competent as the first string, is that a good thing or a bad thing? It might be a good thing, right?
It could be both, to be honest with you. I mean, look, the quarterback isn't going to always have a clean pocket. So what I want to see is, okay, is he making fast decisions? Is he making the right decisions? What do his reads look like? So yeah, I think it's a good thing. And also, maybe you see an element of the offense, maybe they throw in a design scramble or something to take advantage of his mobility that they might not have with Eli Manning in there.
Okay, that's one of the questions that one of our members was going to ask you, so I'm going to say that. I want to ask you about, what do you think about this team this year as far as the chemistry and attitude? I mean, every year the team is a new team. This is the second year under Shermer and Gettleman. As someone who gets into mingle and chat with the players and the coaches, and you're kind of a fly on the wall sometimes, how do you gauge your barometer on this team compared to maybe the year prior or the year prior to that? Does it start from the GM down this time? Does Gettleman have that much influence, or is it the head coach? And what are you seeing?
Just overall, I think it's a more professional team. It's probably one of the most professional teams I've seen in a number of years. And by that, I mean there's a certain balance between going about the job seriously but still having fun with it. Whereas maybe in the past you had guys who I don't want to say weren't serious about the job, but maybe they were a little too loose. And, from the outside looking in, that could be misconstrued as, not caring as much. But this has been a very, very mature locker room. It's been, the players have been absolutely professional. The coaching staff, they've been focused. Everybody's been dialed in. And you just get the sense that, they understand that the last couple of years were not acceptable. Even though some of them weren't here those years, they know that, look, they're part of the Giants, and the records the last few years have not been acceptable, and they have pride in what they're doing, and they want to make it better.
That's a great answer. I'm glad to hear that, actually. It's very encouraging. How would you compare that to the Coughlin era?
Well, I mean,
it's like a long time ago. It seems like, right?
No, it's not. But the Coughlin era, I think you can divide into you can kind of divide that in halves almost. In the beginning part of the Coughlin years, that's what this locker room kind of reminds me of. But towards the end there, when things started going downhill, I think Coughlin, I don't want to say gave up on his principles, because that would be shortchanging the man, but there were certain things that I don't think Coughlin would have done, say in 2005, 2006, that he did, later on in his Giants tenure. And the most obvious, example of that is putting up with Odell Beckham Jr.'s, antics. I think, if those antics had taken place earlier in Coughlin's Giants tenure, he would not have, allowed that to escalate the way it did.
Now, I don't want to put you on the spot here, but do you think at the end Coach Coughlin was maybe a little bit afraid of his job, or was based on how he was approaching some of those issues like Odell Beckham? Because actually he broke Odell into the league, and this whole thing started with him. So that pattern of how he's behaved really did start with Coach Coughlin.
Yeah, if you think back to that whole, ugly incident, at the time the Giants had a bad record, and Coughlin was on the hot seat, and I will maintain that he was trying to save his job. He was trying to win, and I still say that the Coughlin of 2004, maybe through 2010, probably would have reacted differently than what he did, and when I don't want to sound like I'm criticizing Coughlin, because I do have a lot of respect for him, but when you let a player escalate, his behavior escalate the way that the Giants let Odell Beckham Jr.'s behavior escalate, that's generally going to lead to a problem down the line, and unfortunately it did, and he's no longer here, and I'm sure everybody wishes him well in Cleveland, but they had a divorce between Odell and the Giants was just inevitable.
Well, I'd love to have a cup of coffee with Coughlin and kind of ask him that question, if he, in retrospect, if he would have handled it differently. But that's a great answer. I got a question about the job itself as being a beat writer for the Giants and a journalist. Do you rely on a few close associates of other publications or any other media to share information with each other or to bounce observations off each other? Or is this strictly a close to the vest type of a profession?
In terms of, like when we're at a practice, sometimes, a group of us will cluster together and we'll compare notes. But as far as, getting information from sources about things like contracts and injuries and stuff like that, I think everybody kind of, has their own sources and their own way of getting that information. Mm-hmm. So, It depends on what it is, I guess, your assignment is. Even though we're all there to write about the Giants, there are some of us who are assigned to write every little piece of news that happens, including who's going to the bathroom at what time. And then there are those of us who, are there to soak it all in and then formulate, analysis and opinions based on what we see. So there's different types, different ways to approach the job. And again, it depends on what the editors ask us to do. I mean, in my case, I try and do broad scale analysis. I try to do with the X's and O's. I kind of went back a little bit on player features this year. I've been using player features more so for my podcast rather than writing them up. And just, that has helped me to work a little bit smarter this year.
Interesting. I guess you answered my question there. So before I get into the questions from the Big Blue Huddle members, I'd like to have you evaluate the depth at each position. And I don't mean each player, but maybe look at a position and is it deep, is it adequate, or is it shallow, in your opinion? So you can start with offense if you want. You can start with the quarterbacks.
Okay, yeah, quarterback, I think they're fine. I have no, qualms about that. Running back, I think they're fine. Actually, let me just tell you where I don't think they're okay. Offensive line still worries me, specifically offensive tackle. Even before the injuries started, eating into the depth, I did not like what I was seeing from the backup offensive tackles. I thought some of them might have regressed a little bit. And I going back to your other question about, do you keep stuff close to the vest or share observations? I was sharing an observation with a colleague, and we both agreed that, the Giants better have a plan to make sure that if when Daniel Jones goes out there to play, if he's playing behind, these backup offensive tackles, that they protect this kid. Otherwise, he's going to get his head, bashed in. So that would be a concern for me. Defensive line.
There's injuries also on that offensive tackle position, right?
Yeah, there's also injuries, but even before the injuries, I'm not going to sit here and say I was jumping up and down and saying, okay, I feel good about, the depth that they have here. Defensive line, I think they're okay. Off-ball linebackers, I separate edge and off-ball. I think they're going to be okay there. I had some questions coming in about, Ty Davis and Ryan Connolly, and those questions have kind of been answered a little bit. I think B.J. Goodson might be on the bubble. I would not be surprised if he doesn't make the 50-man roster. I think we're fine at the edge. At safety, the fact that Corey Ballantyne and Julian Love Julian Love more so has really helped solidify that group. So I'm okay with that group. And I'm okay with the cornerbacks. I think the cornerbacks have some really good young depth. What I'm a little queasy about is the fact that Jabril Peppers and Golden Tate are listed as the punt returners. I would rather they not be the primary punt returners. I would rather see, somebody a little lower down on the depth chart at receiver or cornerback take on that role. But that's where we kind of stand right now. I think that injury to Corey Coleman really kind of threw a monkey wrench in that position.
Well, who would be the other returner if now Golden Tate's going to be out for 4 games? And did you hear anything?
It would be Peppers.
Just Peppers? And what if he can't go? Who's the next person? I
think Sterling Shepard is also listed as a punt returner. And, the bottom line is I don't want to see any guy who's going to have a big role in offense or defense returning punts. I'm sorry. I'm still, shell-shocked from the Jason Sehorn incident a few years ago. I know that, look, you got to move on, and that was just, an unfortunate event that happened. But I would rather, especially if the Giants end up having to punt a lot of times, or return a lot of punts per game, I would rather not have to see, Jabril Peppers, after running around and taking 100% of the snaps on defense, have to go out and do more work like that.
Well, would you like to see? You want to see somebody with sure hands? That's number one. And what about a Wayne Gallman or?
I don't think he's ever done punt return. He's done kickoff return. T.J. Jones, Britton Golden, and Darius Slayton are the other guys listed at punt returner on the depth chart.
But those guys, Golden, 2 of those guys aren't going to make the team, probably, right?
Right, exactly. So I just wonder if maybe the Giants are going to pick somebody up off waivers once the final cuts are made, and to do that because again, I could see going to like a Jabril Peppers or a Golden Tate if you need a spark, but I don't. Me personally, I do not want to see them doing it as a full-time gig.
I think a lot of fans agree with you on that. I think there's a lot of fans that are on, thinking from that perspective. We all remember the Seahorn incident, and we'd hate to lose somebody like a Golden Tate, which we're going to lose for 4 games anyway. So what happens if somebody goes down? Yeah, I don't know who that person would be. Maybe they're on the team. Maybe it's a backup running back, or it could, I don't know what else would have to be. Maybe a backup cornerback, maybe somebody that has some speed and good hands. I don't know. Usually those defensive guys aren't those type of players, right? They usually don't have good hands.
Yeah, usually you would want a receiver or to do that, but
yeah.
or at least a guy who can make interceptions on a regular basis. So I just think that's one of my 2 biggest concerns on this roster are punt returner and backup offensive tackle.
I completely agree. And so does Rich, because we're sitting there at camp and we're having the same discussion back and forth, and especially with Golden Tate, because we know he's going to be out for 4 games. So whatever happens, something happens to Peppers, then you got somebody who didn't have as much experience in fielding those punts. So
yeah.
Now I'd just like to go into some of the questions from some of the folks at the Big Blue Huddle, and this is from Baby Wells Chris. He's asking, regarding the academic side of the game, what are Pat Shurmur's greatest strengths when game planning, and what do you feel are his greatest weaknesses? And I'm going to just add another little question in there. Do you like the fact that he's calling the plays?
I'll answer that question first. I am not a fan of him calling the plays. I understand why he's doing it. I understand the benefit he hopes to get from it, but I am not a fan of the head coach being the play caller. I think that should be designated, and, the head coach should manage the entire sideline and not necessarily worry about, one side of the ball. Okay. Regarding the strengths, I think Pat Shurmur does a really good job of tailoring the offense to the strength of his players and putting them in the best possible position to make plays. His weaknesses, and this kind of ties into the question about, whether or not I like him calling plays, I don't think he's the world's best game clock manager. I had some issues or some questions about that in the past, and that's why I would prefer he not do it. But, with some guys, they just can't let go. It could be an ego thing, or it could be, look, I know what I want to do, and I can make the adjustments in game as necessary.
Do you have confidence in Shula to do that job?
He did it in Carolina, didn't he? I think he did it in Carolina. Didn't they go to the Super Bowl with him? So
okay, all right. So if he's calling the plays, that means he's actually putting this game plan together, and he's doing a lot of this during the week when he's preparing the team. Is there a possibility that he may not get a full grasp of what's going on the defensive side of the ball, where he could be walking into some of those meetings and watching things where he's basically focusing on the offense?
No, I don't think that's the case. I think pretty much he lets James Betcher run that defense. Now, I'm not saying that James Betcher shows up to work on Sunday and says, okay, coach, here's what I'm going to do. I think there's communication throughout the week. But for the most part, I think, Shurmur lets Betcher and the defensive assistants worry about that side of the ball, while Shurmur kind of oversees, he and Shula oversee the offensive side of the ball. I think the best way to describe it is Shula actually does the groundwork. He actually presents like an overall concept, and it's up to Shurmur to pick out what plays are going to support that concept. So it's a joint effort. It's not necessarily all Shurmur or all Shula. It's a joint effort, and that's why you always see the two of them really attached at the hip when it pans into the sideline.
And as you talk, and you're just a wealth of knowledge, something came to mind is every time they're preparing for a team, they're preparing against that team. So what they want to do offensively, want to do defensively, is based on the tendencies of that team and how they've executed, correct?
Yes, and that's how you want it to be. I mean, there are some coaches that say, okay, this is what we do well, so figure out a way to stop us, because we're going to keep doing it until you figure out a way to stop it. And then you have coaching staffs that adapt to, who they're facing, what the scenario is, and the other elements that are necessarily involved. And those are the guys who are creative, and those are the guys who generally, as a rule, last longer in the league.
And would that be a Shermer?
Shermer, I think, is a mix. Right now, he's kind of a cross, I think, between doing what they do well and mixing it up. But I'll say this about him last year: I don't know that he was able to do everything he wanted to do last year because of the offensive line being so shaky in the first half of the year. So I would say probably the jury's out about whether or not Shermer has staying power as a head coach. He did really well a couple of years ago when he was the offensive coordinator of the Vikings. So, that's got to count for something. It's just, there are some, he's got ways he can improve too, and he'll probably be the first one to tell you that. But yeah, I think, hopefully now he's got everything he needs. That offensive line has been upgraded, and hopefully we'll get to see some of the stuff that we saw as early as last year. But, it never made it into the game plan because they didn't have the personnel to do it.
When I think of him, I'm thinking grounded. This seems like a man who, the highs and the lows, he doesn't get too high, doesn't get too low. He's kind of like this even keel on how he's approaching everything. That's my, from a distance, that's how I'm perceiving him, is that kind of a coach.
Well, that's the public persona he wants to play.
Right.
You'll never see him get upset or angry. But behind the scenes, I've had people tell me that he can be quite a little spitfire behind the scenes.
Wow, really?
Yeah, former players, current players, because I said, look, Coach always seems like nothing bothers him. And they said, oh, you haven't seen this guy behind the scenes. He can really be, like a little volcano. So yeah, he look, I think with Shermer, if he has his druthers, he probably would rather just go in, teach, speak in a calm tone, not get carry on or anything like that. But there are going to be times when you're going to have to, blast your subordinates. And I think, based on what I've been told by, like I said, current players and former players, there were times when that had to happen.
That's pretty smart, though, when you think about, especially in this market where people will feed off of every little. And that's one of the things, like when you were talking about your job, your profession. You're going after a certain market, and those guys that go after the fluff and all that other stuff, they're actually going after another market. And there are some people that love that stuff, and they want to hear that kind of stuff. So he's able to avoid all of that, like with his public persona, as you just described. So Chris also asked, who's proving themselves to you, in your perspective, as the most impressive assistant coach on the staff?
Oh, that's a good question. Wow.
You see these guys working with the different units, and, sometimes you get a glimpse of that?
You know what? I mean, I know James Betcher had aspirations to be a head coach, so I don't know if you want to count him. He is technically an assistant coach.
Uh-huh.
So I think he could potentially be a head coach in the making. From the position coaches, I'm just trying to think here. Hal Hunter, no. Ty Tolbert, maybe. Ty Tolbert seems to be a go-getter, a guy who's very active.
And what's his position?
Receivers.
Okay.
I'm trying to think who else.
He's going to be very important with all those injuries.
Yeah, absolutely. On the defensive side of the ball, yeah, that's a tough one because they have a lot of, guys who who are, they're veteran coaches. This is all they've done. So, they obviously have done something to hang around. But, if you're talking about like a future head coaching candidate or a future coordinator candidate, I would say, I would say Betcher for sure, because Betcher's young and he's got, the energy, and he's kind of a go-getter.
I guess his question might be maybe like the cornerback or the secondary coach, where he's got a lot of young players, and he's got a couple of veterans there too to help him along. But how is that guy coaching those young players, that kind of thing? And you know what? Maybe it's a little early to ask that question.
Yeah, I think it is. We've seen the young cornerbacks really, develop and do some nice things in this camp. But, this is against their teammates. This is against, they're seeing the same looks pretty much every other day or so forth. So let's revisit that question another time, because, once we see them against other units, and my measuring stick, just so you know, is I know what units last year lacked. So I want to see if there's improvement from year one to year two from that group.
Okay, all right. So those questions were from Baby Whales. His name is Chris, good friend of mine. The next question is from Larry. His handle is Painter. Larry's been around, almost 20 years on these sites. He's asking. He said he's really interested in how much work Daniel Jones is getting under center, and whether they seem satisfied with his performance to date. In watching Maduke, he seemed to do most of his work from the shotgun. There were also times when he looked like a very skilled ball handler who would excel in play action and RPOs, run pass option, and screen passes. With his agility and his running ability alone, could very well compensate for whatever rookie shortcomings he may have. So he says, although references are regularly made about his similarities to Eli, he sees a player with some very different skill sets. Are there any notable differences in how he's being worked compared to Eli?
Not really. I mean, he's been under center. He's also worked from the shotgun. I can't see anything per se that really jumps out at me. I mean, I think maybe the only difference would be there might be some designed running plays with him, bootlegs and stuff like that. But Eli has done that as well. So I would say, look, ultimately, the coaches always say next man up. And I always kind of say, well, it's not really next man up, because these aren't robots. Every player is different. But ultimately, they want these guys to be able to do what they call, how to execute the offense or the defense on how it's, as it's drawn up. So I guess that's what they're talking about.
So if Daniel Jones came in the middle of the season, they wouldn't change this offense at all for Daniel Jones. They would have the same offense that they would have ran for the first 6 games or whatever that Eli played. Not that I'm saying they're going to pull Eli, but in that case, it's the same offense.
No, not really. They might add some things. Like I said, Daniel Jones has better mobility than Eli Manning. He's not afraid to rush. So I think they might, tweak it like that.
Roll out more RPOs, maybe.
Yeah.
Do that from under center. How long do you think before he's fully competent and confident under center? You think it would take? You think he's got it now, or do you think this is something that he just needs to work on a little bit more?
I think he needs to work on it. Again, my biggest thing with Daniel Jones is he hasn't quite learned how to handle pressure as well as maybe you'd like him to. He tends to rush passes. He doesn't, put the ball where it needs to be. He had a few passes batted down. I think for a stretch of 3 or 4 days in a row, he had pass batted down. So all that's going to come as he gets live reps. So the more reps he gets, the better. Okay.
All right. This is from G-Man 329. Mighty Giants, Rich, said that he mentioned that Coughlin ran more of an efficient camp than Shermer, and he'd like to hear your thoughts on that.
I disagree. I think it's about the same, to be honest with you. I will say that, if we compare it to Ben McAdoo, it's a much different camp. And here's why I disagree. Shermer has had these players practicing in the hottest part of the day, in case anybody has this.
Yeah, we know because we sat in that hot sun waiting to get in. Yeah.
So think back to, years past, and how many times, did the offense or the defense more so look gassed at the, going into the fourth quarter. That wasn't necessarily because they were playing a lot. That was part of it. But, they were gassed because, they practiced during the cooler parts of the day. So there's a method to that madness.
Okay.
And the other thing that Shermer does that Coughlin did is they don't waste practice time. Like, for example, if you go back to the McAdoo era, he would gradually build them up. So I can remember like the first few training camp practices literally being walkthroughs. And I'm sitting there thinking to myself, dude, you only have X number of practices. Why are you wasting them? These guys are supposedly in shape. They passed the conditioning drill. Why are you wasting these practices? Shermer didn't do that. He had he had the matted pads for the 2 days that, are required by the CBA, the acclimation period. But if I remember correctly, they've been in pads every day since. Now, they're not necessarily going full blast every day since. He'll back them off a little bit. But Shermer is he's trying to, create the game-like conditions as best as he can in the most challenging conditions, that being the hottest part of the day.
That's really interesting. It's a great point. I think maybe Rich was alluding to when Coughlin ran quarterback drills. He had every quarterback, I think, engaged with some kind of offense where they were throwing the ball or they were doing something. And maybe that's the perception that he was looking at. And I think that was my thought when I read that and when I was talking to him about it. Jolly Blue Giant had asked that he hasn't heard a peep or read even a smidge of information on how Paul Adams is doing so far. What's your opinion on him and how's he looking in camp? Rick is his name.
I mean, if I'm being honest with you, he hasn't jumped out at me. I can't give you an assessment because when I do my camp reports and stuff, I don't write down player names. I just write down numbers, because there's 90 numbers and I don't necessarily know all the numbers of the players like I would during the 53-man roster. And the reason why I do that is because I don't want to go in with a predetermined, okay, I'm going to watch, Evan Ingram, for example. So I write down numbers and then I go back and I pull out my roster and then I say, okay, whose number did I write down a lot and whose number didn't I write down? And I can honestly say I did, I think I wrote down Paul Adams' number once and it was a negative note that I took. Okay.
But that's a good way of going about it. So you're not biased as to when you're looking at a player. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Little Giant says he would like to know how the backup defensive line is doing, and are they all new from last year?
I'm sorry, the backup offensive line?
No, defensive line.
The back. You know what? I like the depth they have in that unit. The projected starters are B.J. Hill, Dalvin Tomlinson, and Dexter Lawrence, and behind them, R.J. McIntosh has really looked good. I mean, I've been really impressed by how quickly he's come back on. Chris Slayton has flashed on occasion. Haven't seen too much from Jenkins and Freedom. I'm not going to attempt to say the last name, but
I wouldn't either.
And then Olsen Pierre has flashed. I've seen Jake Sorenza flash a little bit. So I just think that the versatility that this group has, and this is so important because I think it was Dave Gettleman who made this point, and I thought it was a really good point. The reason why they want these guys to be as versatile as possible is because when they initially line up, sometimes there's shifts in the offense to where now suddenly, a guy who was initially lined up as the nose tackle is now a one or a shade or something like that. So I just like what they're doing with this group, and I like the depth that they have. And I got to admit, it was a question mark for me in the spring, but they have really, really come on.
When B.J. Hill was out that one day for the birth of his child, congratulations, I saw Olsen Pierre in there taking a lot of snaps, I believe, right, that day?
Yep.
Okay. So that was a good question, and that's a good answer, and I'm sure he's really happy with that answer to hear that. So my friend Frank down in Delaware, Shoeless Joe, he would like to know your thoughts on Corey Ballantyne, the X-Man, and Dexter Lawrence. How much do you think they will contribute to the defense? At what point will they contribute, and how much will they contribute on special teams play?
Okay, my thoughts on those three. Love Dexter Lawrence. I mean, I'm just amazed at how well he moves. I mean, we think of the old dancing elephant analogy that George Young used to talk about for offensive linemen, the dance of the elephants. And, I hate to use this comparison on anybody, because of their size, but that's kind of what it reminds me of. Lawrence is so athletic, so mobile. And, considering his size, I think any questions people had about him being a 3-down player have been resolved. Corey Ballantyne, initially I thought maybe he might sneak through to the practice squad, but you know what? Kudos to this young man. He has really, really bounced back from the unfortunate tragedy that he went through after he was drafted. And he's just got both feet on the ground and doing a really good job. And I see him now, being a part of this defense in some capacity. Julian Love, I've always liked. I mean, he's an intelligent young man, very well spoken. He has a deep appreciation for historic football programs. I did an article for him, on on Forbes about that. And just, very active. And the mere fact that he's able to learn two positions and perform them as well that he has really speaks to the work that he has put in, to get himself up to speed.
He also asked about the X-Man.
Oh, the X-Men? Oh,
yeah.
Love him. X-Man reminds me a little bit of OCU Manura. I know Giant fans will probably remember OC as being primarily, good against good as a pass rusher, but shaky against run. X-Man, considering he came from a small program, he has a tremendous toolbox with which to work. To where, I think he's going to be a situational pass rusher in the beginning. Only because these guys got to develop against a run. That's very rarely do you find a guy who comes into the NFL and he's a great run stopper and a so-so pass rusher. It just doesn't happen a whole lot. Kerry Wynn would have been the last example I could think of. X-Man is a smart player. He's got that quick first step, that quick burst. He's learning the run. I'd like to see him, shed tackles a little bit better when he gets caught up in the wash, but I'm very, very encouraged by what I've seen from him, and I think he's going to be a tremendous player.
That's great to hear. Now, that's actually a 5-man front because it's in this 3-4 defense. Those two edge rushers are actually the other two men that are on the line. Their hand may not be down, but that also helps against containing outside runs too. So that should help him. What about Sam Beal? Now, he's missed, again, a lot of camp. And what about Darius Slayton? That's my question. It just came into my head. Those two players really needed a lot of work this camp. And how do you think that's going to set them back when they're able to come back?
Yeah, I think it is. I mean, look, they talk about mental reps, which I always think is quite honestly, I think it's just, because it sounds so good. It's like, oh, I'm getting mental reps. Well, I can get mental reps. I can envision an article, how an article is going to look. But unless I actually put my fingers on the keyboard and take action and write it, it's not going to come out. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So it's kind of the same thing with football. You can know what to do and how you're going to do it and all that other good stuff. But if you're not doing it, that's the other part of the equation. And I think the more you miss because of injury, the worse it's going to be. The more you're going to have to catch up on.
And that's not good because they were counting on those two players, especially that deep threat in Darius Slayton.
Yeah.
Yeah. So the next question is by Greg. Greg's a moderator on the Big Blue Huddle, and he's asking about the pass coverage with the linebackers, and will opposing tight ends and running backs feast again, or are we improving there? So I guess he's talking about those inside linebackers that will be the guys that will be in coverage on that. What are your thoughts on that, Pat?
I think from what I've seen, they're going to be a little bit better at that. I think one of the problems was, B.G. Goodson, he's a hard-playing young man, but he's not very, ideal in coverage. So they kind of worked in Ty Davis, who's a converted safety in that role. They have also brought in, Jabril Peppers down in the box. They have been bringing Antoine Bethea a little closer to the line, and then having Julian Love play that deep safety package. So I guess you'd call it the big nickel. And if I remember correctly, when the Giants had that big nickel package in 2011, I don't think they got burnt very often over the middle because of that personnel alignment. So that's what I think they're trying to do again this year, because you're right. Plays over the middle. I mean, people feasted on them over the middle.
Right. And you just hit on something with Peppers. They've been moving him all around. He's been in blitz packages. He's covering the running backs that are coming out in the flat, or even for those dump downs, those check downs. They got him, and Dexter Lawrence has been playing all over. I mean, he's been on the field a lot when I've been to camp and been watching him. So those guys are getting a lot of work and doing different things. Yeah.
Hey, listen, the more you can do, the better.
Yeah. So this is from my friend Steve, Retro Gent, and it's the big question. He wants your impression about the wide receivers. How bad are they, if anything, and what's being said about Tate's chances to get his suspension reversed? I guess because of the fact that there's been a lot of injury, Tate, is probably going to be out for 4 games. How are these other players that are on the receiving squad? Do you think that they're going to be okay? Starting with number 12, Corey Latimer, and Slayton, and some of those players.
Okay, let me think for a second here, because that was a mouthful. I got to get these questions in smaller doses here.
Okay, it's the last one, I promise.
So the question about how. All right. So the first question is, how are the receivers?
Yeah. What's your impression of the wide receivers?
I'm not going to sit here and say I'm panicking. I've seen some good things from the receivers, but I think what they're going to miss, especially if Tate's suspension is upheld, and we should know by Friday for sure where he stands with that, is I don't know that they're going to have somebody necessarily to do some of those bubble screens that they've been doing, which is going to be a part of that offense. In terms of Tate and Shepard, they've been moving them all over the place. They've even moved, Evan Ingram out and Saquon Barkley and have them run receiver routes. So I think they're trying to really, open up the playbook a little bit more. The back end of the receivers, I can't say anybody's really jumped out at me. I guess you could say Alonzo Russell. He's had a pretty good camp, but other than that, Benny Fowler has been, to my mind, a little inconsistent.
Right.
Who else is there? Slayton we haven't seen, obviously. Russell Shepard is a special teamer. Reggie White Jr. has, he's flashed here and there, but not consistently. Let me see, I'm just looking. Cody Latimer is another guy. I think, he's, for lack of a better term, just another guy. And then T.J. Jones might be able to hang around base if he could do, punt returns, which he is listed as the third guy. So, yeah, I think the jury's still out on the receivers, to be honest with you. Okay,
all right. Question about the running backs. Competition between Gallman and Perkins. Seems to be I don't know if it's a competition, but they're both getting, seems like the equal amount of reps. And which one do you see is being the number 2 back, Gallman or Perkins?
Well, right now I think Gallman is holding on to that job. The thing with Gallman, and if you follow me on Twitter, you've seen me say how much I love how Gallman runs, and I have not changed my mind about that. What I don't like about Gallman's game is the ball security, and if he doesn't hang on to that ball, guess what? He's not going to get touches, and we saw that. So I think right now that competition is probably even. Steven, if you had to pick one, I would say Gallman probably has a slight lead in that competition. But this is going to be we're going to need to see this play out over several games. And I don't really expect to see Saquon Barkley play much this summer, if at all. There's no need to put him out there and risk, God forbid, something happening. So I think you're going to see a lot of that backup running back competition unfold.
He's been on a pitch count, and so has Solder, and also Ingram seems to be. They've been holding back on him a little bit too. Anybody else you see that they're holding back on a little bit?
Marcus Golden would be another one.
Okay.
I'm trying to think who else. I think that's pretty much it off the top of my head.
So, what other competitions do you see at a position that have piqued your interest?
Let me see. Competition. I guess the off-ball linebackers. Just seeing how that's playing out. I want to see who's going to be the fourth edge rusher. That right now they have Kareem Martin, Marcus Golden, Carter, and X-Man. I want to see if Avery Moss fits into that picture at all.
Okay.
Obviously, the offensive tackle situation is a great concern to me.
Me too.
Center, I think they're going to go with John Jalapeno. I just get that feeling that he's going to be the guy. They just like him better for that role.
And he's competing with Spencer Pulley. Right.
He's competing with Spencer Pulley. But yeah, I mean, otherwise the other positions are kind of falling into place. No major surprises, I think.
So maybe there's some competition for the backup, and maybe there'll be somebody that might make the team on special teams.
Right.
Okay. Final thoughts? Anything you want to talk about or bring up?
Nope. Just that I'm glad that we're finally getting into the games. There's going to be so much more to talk about, some new material to write, new analysis, and I'm looking forward to putting some of my knowledge that I learned when I attended the Scouting Academy this past spring, I should say, into my film study.
How interesting was that for you?
Oh, I loved it. I'm going back for a second semester next off season. It was tremendous. I mean, I always watched film, obviously, but the thing with people who say they watch film is they, you can put your eyes on it, but you don't necessarily know what to watch for or what you're looking at. And I'm not saying that I didn't know what to look for. I had an inkling, but I have such a greater understanding. I did mostly the offense in my first semester. So next semester I want to do the defense and really, hone in on that. And I would have done it this summer too, but, between training camp, and I'm also trying to finish up a book that I'm working on. Just wasn't enough hours in the day for everything.
Where were you attending this scouting camp?
You do it online. You go
it's an online course. Okay.
Yeah, you go Scouting Academy. I think it's scoutingacademy.com. Everything is done online. They show you how to basically scout like a pro scout would. You fill it, you create reports. You watch film. You watch instructional videos from position coaches. Like, for example, Howard Mudd was the positional coach for the offensive line. Howard Mudd, who's like top of the line. Mike Sullivan was the instructor for the receivers. So I just found it to be very, very interesting and well worth the investment. And I'm really looking forward to going back and doing, the second half. You do about 4 modules on average. So I almost finished the 4th one, but I'm definitely going to go back now that I have a better idea how to watch film. I'm going to go back and I'm going to finish it up next off season.
Rich Mighty Giants. Rich was also, he attended one of those camps. He did an online camp for that too, for scouting. So he loved it also. I don't know if it's the same. Yours is probably a little bit different. I don't know. So anyway,
I don't know what he did, so I can't comment on it. Yeah, Dan Hatman runs it. Dan Hatman used to be a scout with the Giants and I think the Eagles and a couple of other teams, and he does a really good job. And by the way, he's not paying me to say this. I'm speaking from the heart here, but I thought it was a really good program, and it's open to anybody who wants to take it. It's not just for media or for football, junior scouts or anything like that. Anybody who wants to take it and really develop an appreciation and an understanding of how to watch film. I mean, I'm talking the intricacies. It's well worth it.
Well, I'll tell you, you have been a wealth of knowledge as always. You hinted that you're writing a book. That's going to be very interesting. Yeah. So good luck with that. I want to thank you for taking the time out of your very busy schedule to be here tonight. It's 9:00 at night, and we're talking football, and I really appreciate that. I'm sure the members of the Big Blue Huddle will, and everybody that's going to listen to this podcast on SoundCloud and also when I put it on YouTube. Would you just tell the audience again where they can find you?
Sure, absolutely. You can find my podcast, the Locked On Giants podcast, at lockedongiants.com. All the episodes are there. The newest ones are usually up top. We have a Twitter mailbag every week, so if you didn't get your question answered or you want to participate, usually we do it via Twitter. I tell people tag me, Ask P Trade, or you can email them to lockedongiantspodcast@gmail.com. My writing has been, most of my writing has been on the Football Maven site. It's actually a cross between the Maven, Sports Exchange, and Inside Football. So you can find that at footballmaven.io/NYGiants. And I have video, I have analysis, I have audio. I'm putting new content up every single day. So a lot of cool things there. Inside Football is my base publication. That's a subscription product. And we actually break down the players, by each player who takes part in the game. So if you want to get some of these questions answered that I wasn't able to answer about how this guy's looking or how that guy's looking, that's what you want to pursue. And you can find information on that at InsideFootball.com. And then I have my writing over at Forbes. I just got promoted, actually, on Forbes to a senior contributor status.
Wow, congratulations.
Thank you. So my site at Forbes is, I think it's actually, let me look it up real quick. I don't want to give you guys the wrong URL, but I always tell people if you Google my name and Forbes, it'll come up. It's Forbes.com/sites/Patricia Traina, all one word. So if you want to check that out, that's more of an analytical type thing where I'm doing mostly salary cap stuff. So if that's your bag, that's where I'm putting a lot of that stuff.
Are you still doing The Athletic?
No, The Athletic, I've expanded elsewhere. Like I said, I've got the Maven now. I've got Inside Football. I've got Forbes. So all that kind of keeps me,
Yeah, that's
busy.
enough.
Yeah. And I also contribute to Big Blue View, on occasion as well. So.
Are you still doing podcasts with Ed?
No. Unfortunately, Ed and I had to split up. It's a shame, too, because, Ed's company, SB Nation, they wanted to do to start their own podcast network. So he left, and I still have him on as a guest every once in a while, but I've been basically flying solo. And what I try and do is I try and get different guests to come on with me because I'm sure people don't want to hear me yammering all the time every day. And that's doing really well. The podcast has, grown, and I thank everybody who has made that possible, and I thank everybody who reads me because, the editors, the bosses do notice those page views and everything, and, I'm not about clickbait. My goal is to give you something worth reading, and hopefully those of you who have read me think that I have done a good job with that, and those of you who haven't read me yet, I hope you will check out the various sites I do and interact with me, especially over on the Maven. You can sign up for a free account and you can post comments, like posts, kind of like you do on Facebook. So always welcome to I always enjoy hearing from Giant fans and readers, and hope some of the Big Blue Huddle folks will, consider signing up.
Well, you know what? We all have a lot of respect for what you do, and we think that you're absolutely fabulous. You do an excellent job with what you do. There's nobody that's more respected on the Big Blue Huddle site than Patricia Traina, and I absolutely mean that. And I don't know if you go on there from time to time and you can see it yourself, but a few of those guys gush over you.
Well, that's not very nice. I'm humbled by that because, look, this is a big market. There are a lot of people covering this team, and I'm just one of, several dozen. And, I appreciate that. And I do wish I could kind of, get over to the site a little bit more. But once we get into the coverage, it's just, I barely have time to eat.
I know. But you know what? Every time you write something and other people are writing their take, and whether it's a game review or whatever, Rich is always putting you on as the premier as first, okay?
Well, I appreciate that.
Yeah, he's always, and he listens to your podcast and everything. Like, he's a big fan.
I appreciate that. And listen, I know people have asked about the sound quality of the podcast. Please, I am working on that. Understand one thing, though. I have been a writer for the better part of 22 years. Podcasting is still kind of new to me, so I am trying to learn how to edit stuff. I'm learning about microphones and equipment and all this fancy stuff. So I do apologize if the sound quality isn't the greatest all the time, but I am trying to work on that and trying to make it as good as possible.
Brian, the big hitter, one of our admins, and you've been on podcasts with him, he actually went to school for that. So if you have any questions, give a shout out to Brian. Maybe he can give you some suggestions. So thanks again. And folks, you can find the Big Blue Huddle at giantsfans.net on Facebook and on Twitter. So on behalf of Patricia Traina and myself, we thank you for listening into our podcast. Go Giants.